Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to another episode in the Illuminance podcast. State change. That is what I would love to explore today. Changing state. This is a very interesting area for us to embrace as HSPs. Changing state is all about an immersive experience that shifts the state in which we're experiencing. And this can be a real game changer, especially when we're running our own business, when we're trying to get a business off the ground, or if we're really just trying to improve our well-being. Let's dive in.
Illuminance specializes in developing sensory processing sensitivity, a natural high sensory intelligence present in 30% of the population, co-creating with the power of humanity to consciously evolve towards balance.
Hello, everyone. It's great to have you here. I am your host today, Willow McIntosh, the founder of Illuminance and creator of the High Sensory Method. And if you'd like to find out more about the High Sensory Method, just before I dive in, then you can head to illuminance.com or highsensoryintelligence.com and head to our programs. And there you can find out about the High Sensory Method and why this is such a crucial step for us in embracing the truth of our identity, working through the issues of self-doubt, and helping us to find the truth of our purpose and the truth of our area of expertise, which changes all areas of lives. It's a phenomenal process of awakening for us that I can't recommend highly enough. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, then simply head to illuminance.com and then go to our programs and you'll see the High Sensory Method course there. And if you have any questions about that, then simply reach out to us at support@illuminance.com, and there you will be able to find out how the course can help with you specifically. When it comes to spelling Illuminance, it's important to check the description notes beneath this podcast episode, or if you're watching it on YouTube, because Illuminance is spelled differently to the usual word illuminance. Thank you very much for your attention with that particular matter. Let us now dive in to changing state. Now, this has been one of the most powerful exercises that I have learned over the years. So let me explain what I mean by this. As HSPs, and this really goes for everyone, not just HSPs, but for us as human beings, let's just start there. We are often at the mercy of habits and programs and the scripts that our brains are running. And what that means is we can often find our state just diminishing in frequency. So in other words, we start to feel tired, we start to feel overwhelmed, we start to over-process, and then we start to decide that there's something wrong with us, self-doubt comes in. And for us as HSPs, this can really take over control of our state. In other words, we end up feeling rubbish, basically. And there is a process that has now, there's been work on this at Harvard, and it's also a process that Anthony Robbins has been teaching for years. And it's something that I utilize myself, and I find it to be hugely beneficial. And I really want to share this with you because it quite literally shifts the experience of what's happening within our well-being, what's happening psychologically and emotionally almost immediately. So what can I give you as an example? One of the tactics that I use on a regular basis is immersion in water. this works incredibly well for me. So I am often based close to the sea. And when I get up in the morning, I tend to go straight down to the sea and I get in the water, and the water's cold enough to immediately shift my state. So what happens is when I'm approaching the sea, like when I'm getting my bag ready and putting my towel in and my face mask, if I fancy a bit of snorkeling, normally in the morning, I just simply want to get in the water. Sometimes I don't even swim. I just kind of immerse myself and hover about in the water. I try to time 5 minutes, because if you do at least 10, I think it's 11 minutes total in cold water in a week, that has tremendous benefits from a health perspective. And that is an additional bonus, but that's not why I'm doing it. The reason I'm doing it is for this state change. So what happens when I wake up in the morning is typically my body isn't aligned yet. So I've come out of the sleeping state, which means that there's quite a lot of focus, or there's most of my awareness is in my head. I'm not engaged in my body yet. And if I start the day like that, if I start the day where my energy is kind of split from my body, then that really doesn't bode well for the beginning of the day. I'm nowhere near as effective and I don't feel good. So by going and getting in the sea, and I know that many of you don't necessarily live next to the sea, and I'm going to give you an alternative just in a moment that will help. So what happens when I get in the water is it's an immediate shift in my state. So what happens is the awareness, or the energy in my body, moves from my headspace into my body, and I feel this immediate change in the feeling of what's happening within me at an energetic level. It's not just a difference in terms of getting some good news, or running positive affirmations. It's different to that. It's actually a shift in the energetic experience of the body, and that's what we need. That experience then allows me to come into the the wisdom and knowing of my body. So my anxiety lowers, my overthinking lowers, I become much more present in the moment, and I feel a sense of natural empowerment. And this is really key, this empowerment piece. And that then allows me to then begin the day in a much more positive state. But it's difficult to attain that just by let's, as I say, methods where we're trying to change our thinking. It's not quite as effective as that. Now, if you have your own morning routine, which I'm sure you do as an HSP, so many of us love to do yoga in the morning, we like to meditate, and that is, of course, changing our state as well. And meditation for me is also effective, and sometimes I am stretching. I used to be much more into yoga than I am right now. What I find is that I tend to have to do those practices for quite a long time in order for me to get a similar experience in changing state. So in other words, I would have to meditate for, I'd have to be close to sometimes 45 minutes to get a real powerful state change. I know there are some techniques that really help to do that more quickly, like, for instance, breathing techniques. I know transcendental meditation is also much quicker at shifting state. However, these types of immersion experiences are much quicker at getting this experience. And sometimes we don't have the time to sit for 45 minutes. And the benefit of these immersion techniques is that we can use it at any time during the day. So in other words, we may not have time to sit for 45 minutes or go into a full yoga routine to get this experience. So immersion in water is one that really helps. And I know that the idea of a cold shower may immediately you may feel the recoiling, the immediate recoil of what it can be like for us as HSPs to have a cold shower. It's something that we often really don't want to do, and I really get that. The cold shower is actually just as effective. I mean, it's pretty close for me of getting into the sea. And the cold shower has the same effect of shifting state. It has this immersive experience. So if you're not close to water, then I recommend the cold shower, not only because it's great for this state shift, but it's also really good for our well-being. In fact, there's a lot of research right now in the power and the effect that cold water immersion has on our health. There are amazing benefits. What I tend to do in the morning is if I can't get in the sea for whatever reason, then what I do is I have a normal shower where I'm washing my hair, whatever. And then at the end of the shower, I then switch the water to cold. And then I have like, well, they say that if you have the shock of cold water, in other words, you just go from hot to cold straight away, and you can kind of run that down on the ground, in the tray of the shower, and get it on your feet a little bit, and kind of warn your body that this is about to happen. Even if you have like a quick, a quick immersion, in other words, you don't have to stand in the cold shower for several minutes. Even if it's just for a few seconds, you still get the benefit of the shift in state. So the cold shower can be used at any time during the day, and it definitely works. There's another one that I have discovered recently, actually, and that was through reading a book, which I just popped into one of my feeds somewhere, I think on Audible maybe, or anyway, wherever it was one day. And it was this book written by Tosha Silver called It's Not Your Money. And something about this book just called me to it, and I started to read it, and it's amazing, this book. I really recommend reading it if you haven't come across it. One of the techniques that Tosha refers to in this book is what she calls the Change Me prayers. And I think actually she might have another book just about Change Me prayers. And the Change Me prayers runs on a principle where you are asking for your state to be changed in a particular area. So, in other words, in fact, she actually discovered this by when she was, I think she was caring for her mother that was very ill who was very ill in hospital. And one day she was really struggling with how she could be of support to her mother. And something just came into her being that came into her mind, where she just said to herself, change me into one that knows how to care for my mother right now. And something amazing happened to her, and her state shifted, and she just knew exactly what she needed to do and who she needed to be in that moment in order to be of the best support for her mother. And it worked tremendously for her in that moment. So I got really interested by this, and I started to use this in my meditation. So what I would do is I would reach my state of grounding and alignment, which I use through a particular process, which is actually, I go through that process in the anxiety meditation that comes free in the High Sensory Method course. And in that process, what I'm doing is I'm helping to ground the energy in my body to come out of this head state experience that so much of us struggle with as HSPs. And what I'm doing is I grounding and aligning in my body, and then I'm speaking to source. So we all have our own word for God, source, universe, love, whatever it may be. I am always talking to source. I'm always asking for guidance. And over the many years of this practice, of when I'm, being guided, I found that it works much better. In other words, the guidance that I receive works far more effectively when I'm grounded and aligned. So for me, I'm clairsentient, which means, well, my main high sensory ability is clairsentience. So in other words, I receive information and guidance through feeling in my body. And that works for me through an expansion and contraction feeling. So an expansion is a yes response for me, and a contraction is a no. And over the years, I've realized that unless I'm actually properly aligned, then I don't get the right sensation in my body that actually guides me properly. That's probably for another conversation. But in the anxiety meditation, which bookends nicely with my introduction to the high sensory method course there at the beginning, in the anxiety meditation, I talk about how to actually gain that state of grounding and alignment, which is really useful for overwhelm and anxiety. However, in this process of when I'm doing that, so in other words, when you're in your own meditation practice, perhaps it is just simply through breathing that you find that place of alignment. It's in that place that we can then say, change me into the state that you want to experience. And I really recommend trying this. You may find that you don't even need to go into meditation. You may find that if you just sit quietly, you can say these words. So we're obviously saying it to something that's higher than us, right? And you know what that is for you and what that experience is for you. So, for instance, if you might want to say, change me into one that is an aligned, empowered state. Change me into one that is an aligned and empowered state, and you'd be amazed what happens. Or change me into one that change me into a state of knowing. Change me into a state of empowerment. You can play with the words. The phrase "change me into the one that" really worked for me initially, which is how Tosha says it. That sentence, "change me into the one that," and then whatever state it is you want to experience, that really worked for me. And I've been doing this for a while now, and I find that "change me" is enough, those two words, and then I say the state that I want to experience. And that has been incredibly powerful. So what's interesting about this is not only is this shift in state so powerful, but for us as HSPs, because we are so engaged with ourselves energetically, or sometimes we're completely in the opposite, when we're not engaged with ourselves energetically at all, we actually have the ability to really utilize this ability to our ability to utilize our energy in the way that we do, because we are so sensitive to the energy in our body, which means we actually have much more control over the energy in our body than we realize. So the change me prayers or the change me statements actually, in my experience, and I'd love to hear what your experience is. Tell me how this works for you. In my experience, because I am so aware of my body, and I'm so aware of when my body's not aligned and not in a state of empowerment or alignment, what that feels like, I've come to realize that I'm able to shift my state energetically really quickly when I use one of these techniques. And the change me prayers or the change me request, let's say, is something that I believe works immediately for us as HSPs because of our relationship with our body energetically. So those are two that I use on a regular basis, and I really recommend this. Like, for instance, if you're about to go into a family gathering, let's say, or you're about to go into some kind of social environment, and you're a bit worried about that feeling of being blown around a little bit, and the experience of the ownership of our power, the ownership of our boundaries, and especially the ownership of our joy is really important when we are in social gatherings, or when we are in experiences that are challenging for us as introverts, if you are an introverted HSP. So these state changes are really important. Change me into one who is in a state of empowerment. Change me into one that knows empowerment. Change me into one that feels my empowerment. You can play with the words around this. But this is really helpful when we're going into those kinds of experiences, because if we're not doing something that's aligning us before we go in, because so many of us, I mean, for me, for the majority of my childhood and my early adulthood, I was so out of my alignment with my personal empowerment. It was, embarrassing. I mean, embarrassing is not the word at all. It was miserable. So for me, I have to be in constant practice of maintaining my alignment and empowerment. If I leave myself out of some kind of practice for too long, I'm just in my mind. I'm in my head. So there has to be something for me that's continuously anchoring me into my alignment. It's got much better over the years because obviously I've been doing this for a very long time now. But there has to be a constant vigilance for me around empowerment and around alignment, because this is my area of expertise, right? So life is always challenging me in this area. So you'll have a version of this, but what I'm really leading to is that it's important to be aware of how your state is and doing something that will shift state for you. So for instance, even doing like 20 star jumps will shift state. Something else I found that shifts state for me, let me have a little glass of water here and then I can pronounce the T's and the S's a little more clearly. Something else that shifts a state for me really quickly is lifting weights, right? Now, again, you might say, well, what does that mean? I've got to get in the car and go to the gym. No, it doesn't. What I found is I got two, I think they're maybe 5 liter water bottles. That might be a bit heavy. Even just a water bottle or something where you can create your own weight. So what I had, I haven't got them here actually. What I had is 2 5-kilogram water bottles where I put half a broom handle between them in their handles and just put some gaffer tape round and made a kind of a digital nomad weights. And if I would just go and literally hold, so sometimes I hold it out in front of me, sometimes I do a bit of couple of bicep curls. I don't know about all this stuff. I'm not into weightlifting at all. But what I have learned now is I've researched, what the right posture to lift properly, and actually what the lifting poses are that work for me, that obviously are very well known in weightlifting. But if I go and literally spend a couple of minutes just either holding it out in front of me or lifting it in different ways that feel interesting for my body, that totally shifts my state. I feel 1,000 times better, even if I have been, kind of exhausted, where I've been working really hard and my brain's really foggy. Doing something with my body immediately shifts the state. And I'm not saying that we then should push ourselves and use it to overwork, which obviously is going to lead to burnout for us. But what I am saying is this is an opportunity to allow us to come back into a place of mental and energetic clarity that stops us from running these false belief systems and programming that can be where we can be really mean with ourselves. In other words, where self-doubt comes in, or we start to get those negative thought patterns coming in. That's normal for all of us as human beings. We all have that. These state shifting techniques can immediately stop those patterns. So not only is it really helpful for when we need energy, but it's also really helpful for maintaining a higher frequency of alignment. And that is crucially important, not only for our well-being, but for everything to work properly in our lives, to maintain a more consistent state of empowerment and a consistent state of truth that's much more close to our inner self. When I get in the sea, I feel an instant kind of connection to myself. I really feel myself, the truth of me. And it's something that I just cannot emphasize the importance of this enough. So I really recommend trying these. And I just want to end by saying that there's been research, Harvard research, notably by a lady called Amy Cuddy. So I'm just reading my notes here. She's demonstrated that adopting power poses, which is expansive body postures, can influence hormone levels and increase feelings of confidence and reduce stress. Now, Tony Robbins has been teaching this for years, the emphasis on changing one's physiological state in order to alter emotional states and enhance performance. It's one of his main areas that's the foundation to his programs and his processes. And Tony Robbins actually has an ice. I think if there's ice in it or not, but he has like a water, just a kind of a tube that's big enough for him to just drop into in his garden. So you can see it on a YouTube video, I think. It's almost like a kind of a tiny little swimming pool. You can't swim in it. It's like a kind of a bath on its end. And he just jumps into that and then gets out of it or stays in it for however long he needs to. And that is a very important part of his process for shifting state. So what they then actually did is they started to do a clinical trial involving Tony Robbins' program, where participants started to experience significant reductions in depression, anxiety, and stress, along with improvements in well-being and life satisfaction compared to a control group. So the research suggested that immersive interventions, immersive psychosocial interventions, can effectively change one's mental and emotional state, a concept that Tony's been advocating for years. I don't actually know what psychosocial refers to there. That might be quite interesting to look into that. The difference between what I'm talking about here is Tony does use body poses and breathing techniques. You can actually go through his process on YouTube that really helps to shift state. And I used to follow that actually for a period of time, which again really helps with the shifting of the state. But for me, what I find is I don't need to do something extensive. And the poses do really help, but for me, it's either getting in water, it's either lifting weights, it's either these change me prayers, or even sometimes I would just move environments. So because I work, a lot on my laptop, sometimes if I just pack everything up and I leave and I go into a cafe and just sit and be among others and just observe others doing their thing, have a cup of tea or whatever, that shifts my state too, that change in environment. And again, it makes a massive difference to productivity, to our well-being. So my invitation is to experiment with this, is try what works for you. But please don't spend too long in a state of that kind of mopey, low frequency, oh, everything's too much, I feel so overwhelmed, oh, it's so difficult being an HSP, all of these kind of some of these thought processes that we can have. I mean, you'll know whatever they are for you personally. We just don't need to be doing that. You can just jump into the shower and have a cold shower, and I promise you it will switch it off. Or you can try these change me prayers, or by just getting out the house, or by lifting weights, or dancing. I'm sure that dancing would make a difference. In fact, I know when I break out into song, if there's a song that I hear, or I happen to put something on and it's one of my favorite songs, that shifts state for me too. And some kind of just crazy dance, just some kind of crazy body movement, sometimes that's enough to do that if I've got the energy for that. That shifts it too. So I really recommend trying this, finding the one that works for you. Maybe there is a local swimming pool that you can go and get into. I think it does really need to be cold water. but swimming may be really effective for you. I just recommend finding one or two that work for you, and definitely trying these change me prayers and statements, which you can, which Tosha Silva, that's Tosha, and then silver as in the metal. Um, she talks about these change me prayers in much more detail. So I really recommend exploring that, because I found those to be really effective. They're immediate. And, again, because we have such a strong relationship with nature, with love, with the universe, with source, with energy, then for us, these techniques I find to be are even more effective. And I really recommend giving them a go. So thank you very much for tuning in. Let me know how this goes for you. I'd love to hear if you have any techniques that work for you. That would be great to hear about those. Or if you want any more information about anything that I've talked about today, then just let me know in the comments, and I would love to support you further in any way that I can. Thanks again. Looking forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.